Eric Mwade. So we just got off the phone with you and I was talking about discussing Taser as a great starting point. And what we're going to be looking at here is the fact that both of us were looking at the same stock, so why not begin with Taser was my suggestion. And so a couple of things here, of course, down about 15% for the week. So the question is, if somebody was to tell you that the stock was going to be trading in the 30s in the next couple of weeks, of course you want to buy somewhere here, of course, but we don't know how low this pullback could be or whether this is as much as lower as it goes. So we don't know, so we're going to have to use the charts to give us an idea. A couple of things: we made a couple of highs, a high, and a slight higher high in the price. While all that was taking place, we had lower lows on the RSI, and we can see that now on hindsight that was predicting a drop. Okay, now if we go back to the same chart, we can see the last time there was a reversal in the stock here, and then here there was a similar type situation where we made a high here, came back a couple weeks again, make another high, and about 2 months later made another high. All the while the technicals were making lower lows. So we had improving prices, but the RSI was making a lower low. That was a problem. So we can see from that simple understanding that since we already see that the stock has given us, on hindsight, a reason why it wanted to go down, and it is going down, we don't know where it's gonna find some stability. So we are better off waiting. Now I'll show you something. So I think if I was to summarize this video here, is answer here is don't do anything but do that. Wait for the stock itself to form some type of stability, to stabilize in price and on the indicators, then maybe we can find an opportunity. But I'll show you something pretty awesome, why you should buy time. Now, initially I was looking at this about a week ago, before this week's drop, as a possibility of breaking out there, and the buy point was 27.61, which is this weekly closing high. So the theory there was, watch Taser. If it breaks out above that 27.61 level, then it's gonna be a buy, because the RSI at that time would push above 69.10. But it did not break out. Instead, we see that it dropped. So okay, so that did not work. That theory of a breakout is similar to this ideal situation here, where you buy the breakout above the previous weekly closing high. In theory, you are wanting to hold a stock that clears resistance. In this case, the resistance was the previous weekly closing high, and the theory is you want to own the stock when it is moving higher. You don't buy it at the lows, you want to own the ride to the top. That's the theory. Just like the theory here, for example, anybody who bought the stock during this movement above this, now this channel connects the weekly closing high there and this weekly closing high, and we draw a straight line. Once we clear that resistance, the theory is, and it's just theory, that you can buy there with the anticipation that over time the stock is going to have momentum to the upside. So that's the theory, and that's why about a week ago we set an alert for the stock to break out above 27.61 as a timing method. Now that failed, just like it did here. If you take this weekly closing high, draw a simple straight line, stock spent a couple weeks above that line, one week, maybe 2 weeks, and eventually rolled over. Now, while it was making all this attempted breakout, it was making higher highs on a weekly closing basis. As we touched on this, RSI was making lower low. Now what's interesting is if I extend this same line, and I know I'm touching on a lot of things because I want this to trigger questions from you so we can have a starting point. That's why I'm all over the map on this one. So the same line that gave us a sell signal here would become an interesting buy, because once the stock jumped above that line there, it was this nice entry. And since that $13, $14 range, the stock has generally been above that range. So anybody who bought here and was patient, we can say has been seeing some nice profit. There was a threat of breaking that. The stock did go up and come back and test that same level and held. So interestingly enough, that this breakout above this previous line that gave us a sell signal here, now once we breach it to the upside, becomes a nice entry point. So curiously how that plays out. Okay, so we get this movement there. We got also the price moving out there, or you can use the weekly closing. So there's a weekly closing high there, there's a weekly closing high, and then there you can also use that. So let me change colors. So remember, there's no hard science. This is just drawing lines so we can see what's going on. So we can take the weekly closing highs, these 3 points, and draw a line. So the line comes generally there. So we can say once it moved above that line, it was moving above this declining line of resistance. So this wall of weekly closing highs was breached to the upside. At that point, the stock was a buy. Coincides with this nice entry. So interesting. Okay. All right. So let's cover one thing. There is a breakout strategy, which is one way to time stock market. Wait for the breakout, which is what some people do. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a method. And then there's another method for playing the dip. You don't buy it here or here or here. You wait for a pullback, maybe even buy it here or here or here. That's the idea. Or here or here. Again, or here during these pullbacks. So that's another way of looking at the market. You either want to buy at the lows, if you can have a method of timing that, or buy at the highs, because one of the reasons why buying at the highs makes a lot of sense is because you know the previous high to the penny, and once the stock breaks out, you can buy it. Problem is when the stock is on a pullback mode, like right now, you don't know where it's gonna stop going down. So that's the trick. But both methods, if successful, make you money. So it doesn't really make a difference as long as you can find a reason to go along a name based on some reasoning on the chart that makes sense. Now, I think that you can use both strategies either way. Number one, we really have to, I think, just always have to find a way to explain to ourselves why a stock would move in the direction we want it to move. So right now, this stock is on a free fall in my opinion. I don't know where the low is. I haven't seen a reason why it could be a low, but I do know one thing for a fact, is the most recent move began here and went from here. So I can see that on the chart. It's very well defined from here to here. That's when the stock has been moving the most recently, and I can see that movement coincides with the RSI moving above this simple line. So this moving above this RSI just here, once it broke out, also coincides with this slight move in price. There's an entry there. I can see that on hindsight. So I know for a fact that this RSI movement here, which if I draw a line like that, that is where the movement began here. So I know that if the stock can come back here around the 50, which so happens to be around the 50 on this chart, if it can come back to that line as close as possible, maybe even below it, and back above it with uniform action, and I can send you a lot of videos on this, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here, but if the stock can give me some type of support on this line, then I have an argument as to why it could move higher, maybe I can start picking up some shares. But that's why I was saying that the key word here is that, because we haven't seen a reason to get back in the name. That's why. Okay, so that by itself just means don't be in a rush. At some point the stock is gonna give you an idea of what's going on. Now when I go back, this is 2 years worth of data. Let's go back about 5, because there's something else I want to discuss here. Okay, so I've gone back. This is about 5 years, and I can see that there was a low here. So I'm just trying to find a point. Remember, we've talked about we have to wait. There, we have to wait because we haven't seen a reason to get back in the name. But we know from the previous chart that this ideal entry point began around the 50. So there's a line there we're going to keep on our charts, and we're going to watch this week to week to see whether it's finding support there. I want to discuss also another entry point, which is actually this low. So this low here at about $12 is actually lower than this entry here we discussed earlier. So let me take that off. So we can see there's a movement from 12 all the way to 28, and this coincides with this RSI moving here. And we can see that if we take the line connecting the recent highs on the RSI there, that the movement began here. So let's say we need to have two lines now. This line of support based, I hope I'm making, based on this entry on this level here from about 15 to 28, or another line down the road depending on how low the stock goes, somewhere here. That would be the last line of defense. Now we can test this, and I can assure you both of them are going to be valid at some point. If I take this, it's always a good idea to test to see whether your methods make sense. And I know this is a little bit early on in our mentorship program here, but I just want to show you how this, if we go backwards, because a good strategy should make sense going into the future. And let's assume we can time travel and go backwards. It should also make sense. In other words, if the price was to start doing the same thing but in the opposite direction, can it tell us what it's going to do in the future? And we can see that on this chart, the 50 level was used previously. Now remember, we are traveling backwards. Hope that makes sense. We can see that stock has used the 50 level here with a double bottom support, which was here, which began this move. So we know that has been tested. That makes sense. It comes here and does the same thing at the 50, which are these lows at about $7. It goes all the way to about 10. That's the 30%. And then also there's another movement here. So we know that that line around the 50 is legit. So let's say if the stock comes here, stabilizes, and jumps above this line, and notice on all of these backtesting levels, we have uniform activity there. In other words, it's doing something like this. We got double bottom, which is this is here, and then we got another situation here that looks like this, and I think it comes back and touches it again. Now that is this uniform activity here is here, and of course we have the next one, which is like that, which happens to be this, happens to be here. All of them uniform activity. So we know that if the stock comes here and does anything, any one of these uniform activity moves here in the current market, then maybe we can start looking for buy signals or for buying opportunities. So that's one way. Now, on this chart, I can see that the low is at about $4, April of 2012. From $4, it initially would take a break here at about 20, came down, and then eventually here at 28. But this is the nice low. On hindsight, this is where you would have been wanting to go long on hindsight. for the ideal maximum profit. You can see that if we draw a simple straight line here, which corresponds with the lows, we can draw a line this way. Now this makes a lot of sense because we can see that eventually it would come very close to testing that line there, which held, which was a very nice low there. Perfect. If you got the stock here, you are holding it at $7 and almost immediately you start making money with a chance of eventually getting out somewhere between 7 and 20. Okay. Now eventually we come and break below that. There's one movement above, below the green line and back to it, below the green line and back above it. So in other words, it looks something like this. And this is some of the things we might have to work on. Is uniformity comes in many shapes. It went below, back to it, like that, and eventually above it. So even though you don't see it at first, but it is uniform action, because this is uniform and then also this is uniform. So you got two uniform activities. So let me change colors here to explain that. So you got this movement here and then followed by another movement here. All of them equal to uniform action. Eventually when it moves back above that level there, which is here, the stock is a buy. And since then it's somewhere around here at about $13. You see it spike. So we can see that this is the second level of support. So hope you can see that again. So we find the entry there, which began this move. And we know that we have to be patient and wait for the eventual two things to happen. So let me draw that again because I want the line to be as thin as possible. Hold on a second. Let me draw the right. Alright. So we got this line here, like that. And we know that there's also another entry point. So this ideal entry point corresponds with that point and this point, which is also this point. We know that there was another entry we discussed here, which is here. So either it's going to come back and test this 50 level, or it's going to have to come back and test this other secondary line here. So we wait for one of those two to give us some type of uniform support. And that's why I was saying wait. We can say, why rush in and buy the stock when we haven't seen a reason of coming back to two critical levels on the stock? There's one secondary one around the 50, and there's another secondary one around this level here based on this line. So personally, that's my initial takeaway. Okay, if we take a look at the daily, we can also see that this movement from about 14 to 28, which is a good 100%, began during this RSI breakout there. So this entry was here. And of course what we do, we take a simple straight line like that. And we have to wait for uniform action around this line and back above it. So for example, let's say in the next 2 days, if the chart looks like that, which is a V-type recovery, then the stock would be a buy. Yes, you'd buy it here at about 24, between 24 and 25 because of that V-type formation. Then you might consider this generally an area where you can buy. But until you see that, you can see that that is actually, it needs to be above this line now. So it broke through that. That could be a problem, unless it can move back above that line of uniformity. Now, remember we talked about going into the future or going into the past. It's always good to test some of these things. We can test the validity of this green line by going backwards, and we can see the other point on this chart there. There's two movements. There's one nice movement here and a pause, and another movement here before the most recent pause. And we can see this movement from here to here happens to also have began right there, which corresponds with here. So this green line is legit, and what we are demanding is uniform action below this line and back above it for the stock to give us a buy signal. Otherwise we are going to have to ignore. Hope that makes sense. Also, this line here, so let me take that off, and I might have to make a couple of videos, maybe one more video on this one single chart, because there's so much to discuss, so much. And I think what I want you to do is probably just digest it and then try and give me an input into where we should go next. There's also higher high price movement, lower lows RSI movement. So if we draw this line and extend it down like that, the same line, so the same line that was resistance here becomes another resistance point here. The same line once we extend it, and that's another lesson we are going to have to keep coming back to, is we always need to learn to extend our line. So using the previous example, we can see that it's not until the stock itself moves above this declining line that it's going to be back to momentum move. Just like you can see, this movement here did not begin until there was a movement above this declining line. Hope that makes sense. This declining line has to be broken for momentum to get back in the name. And now we have one that is sloping a little bit this way. So we can see that there's no great movement in Taser for now until down the road. It could be weeks, it could be months, until it breaks out above that line. So that's also something else as to why I was saying the main word on such a name that has now seen a pullback is this: what's the rush? Sometimes the rush should only come when you're buying a breakout, as for example here, or maybe even the actual high. So this movement here, as it broke out there, maybe there's a reason to be a little bit more aggressive, because it might not come back, and here it just continued moving higher day to day. So that's one way. And again, another thing we have to touch on is there's so many ways to look at. Either you can use that breakout to new highs, or you can draw your line this way, connecting the daily highs. And all these are valid. None of them is wrong, none of them is better than the other. They are all just different ways of looking at the same thing. And so I think I could stop the video there, but I want to touch on one small thing, and it is this level here. And we can see that the last time it moved back below 69.10 was during this movement here, was actually here. This move below 69.10 took the stock from about $18 all the way to about 11. And that's a big correction in terms of percentage points. And it's only until it came back and found support at the 50 that it began to build. So we are seeing it move below 69.10 again, without knowing, without seeing any monthly chart change. We have to wait. I want to go back a couple years. Let's go back about 7 years. And it's not the best one in terms of what I want to show, but it could be alright. I want to show you another. And how can one chart have so much to consider? Remember, you don't have to look at all these points, but since we have time, there is a breakout here on the RSI. Now remember, for about since 2008, trading at 18, it went all the way back and was trading for all this period between $4 and $6. So it spent a lot of time here, about 3-4 years, doing nothing. And it is only until it broke out above RSI line here that it started picking up momentum. So anybody who was buying here eventually could have looked back and said, probably would have been a good idea to until momentum was established. All right, so let's go back and show you what I'm talking about. So there's a breakout here on hindsight, and that was entry there, which is this price entry. Now if we take a simple straight line from here, there we can see that this low actually coincides with uniform activity below the green line. It also touched 50 and the movement above that line. So it looks like this. That's the green line, and the RSI did something like this. Let me see if I can get it right. And so below the green line and back above it with uniform activity, once it moves back above that and reclaims that line, it's a buy. And so it's this movement around here. If you use that principle, you would have gone long the name with a chance of owning part of this move. Now I don't know whether there's something else you saw, but I was talking about line extensions. Take a look at this. See this nice breakout here? Let's extend the same line. And this same line comes and points and tells you exactly where to go along the name. The same line has done two things. One, it gave you the breakout level that changed the momentum in the stock after the stock had been trading in this general area for a couple of 3 years. The same level, the same stock, or the same line, when you use an arrow, comes and points and tells you exactly where you should go along the name, which is exactly here. Now it's curious how that plays out, but that did. Something else we should not forget, and I need to stress this, is this movement here in the RSI, and this is absolutely important. This movement happens to be also where the stock moved to 3-year highs on the RSI. I do not know of any other method that is as powerful as this requirement that the RSI, for a stock to change into and become a momentum name, it has to do two things. It has to make at least a 3-year high on the RSI, we know that, which is what it did here. Remember, it's important to understand that this is taking place after all these years of sideways action. So all these years, how many trades were done here that did nothing? That's a long period. And the only time the movement starts picking up momentum is when the RSI jumps to 3-year highs. Okay, that's one requirement. Second requirement is for at least one of our MACDs to move to 3-year highs. So this corresponds with this RSI move to minimum of 3 years or more. And we can see that the main MACD had already crossed over above, had already moved above 3-year highs. So 3-year highs there. Also the move above 0 is a change of momentum. Breakout to 3-year highs and also moving above 0 on the MACD. RSI at 3-year highs, price breakout. Very interesting. All right. So we know that the MACD also has to be at 3-year highs. And this is probably the most important thing that I could teach anybody. It's a very simple concept, but this is where things start moving. I want to show you one simple thing in conclusion here. If I take this low, connect it with this low, to this low, extend it, it also gives me the same point, which is this point here. And the same point comes back and also gives me the same point again. So we just have to learn to use the RSI to give us interesting points on the chart. So again, and how this plays out is, honestly, I don't understand how this plays out. You get the same line giving you support, and let's change colors here. Again, same line gives you another line of entry. Both of them end up right there. Very interesting. And since then, you can see here to here. So right now we are looking at a stock that is coming off 69.10 right now, and we haven't seen any support being shown on the monthly chart yet. We haven't seen any support on the weekly. We haven't seen any support on the daily. The conclusion there is we have to wait, and at some point the stock is gonna maybe change. It could be next month, it could be 6 months from today, but it's wait, play the waiting game. There's no rush until you see some buy signal based on very simple lines, that either by line extension or by the stock coming back to a critical point on the chart itself. So I think that's a good beginning point. Shoot me an email or text me. Let me know what you think would be the next place to, or the best topic to begin with. After we've touched on one stock, I could have gone on and on for another half hour, an hour on this chart. There's so much that we can talk about, but I think that's a good starting point. Otherwise, hope you're doing well. Eric Moore, good luck, peace, and blessings. Woo!